What happens when the tyrant of an HOA, the woman every neighbor whispered about as Karen, barges into my private lake cabin uninvited, only to discover that I'm sitting with a U.S. district judge discussing her corrupt reign over our neighborhood? It started on a crisp autumn morning when the lake shimmered with the kind of calm that only comes before a storm, both literal and human, and I had finally taken a long overdue step by inviting Judge Reynolds, a respected federal figure known for his no-nonsense approach to property rights, to my secluded retreat so we could quietly review the stack of evidence I had compiled against the HOA board, and more specifically, against Karen, who had run it like a personal kingdom for years, demanding fees for imaginary landscaping, threatening fines over garden gnomes, and even insisting that children's chalk drawings on driveways were graffiti that lowered property values. And as I poured coffee for the judge, explaining how Karen had falsified meeting minutes and siphoned HOA dues into accounts she controlled, the screen door slammed open so hard it rattled the frame, and there she stood, arms crossed, eyes blazing, hair frizzing from the misty air, already mid-sentence about how I was in violation for painting my mailbox a shade of navy not pre-approved by the color committee, except her voice faltered when she noticed who was sitting across from me, because Judge Reynolds wasn't just any guest, he was a towering man with a gaze that could pin even the boldest attorney to their seat, and he calmly set down his mug and looked at her with the faintest trace of a smile, saying, "Mrs. Thompson, I presume," which made her flinch because she had no idea she was about to walk into the biggest reckoning of her life. And in that single breath the cabin shifted from casual retreat to courtroom energy, with Karen sputtering about privacy and rights, as if she hadn't just trespassed into my home, and I took the chance to slide across the table a folder thick with documents, photos, and even recordings of HOA meetings where she had bullied residents, manipulated votes, and once screamed at a veteran neighbor for flying an American flag that was too large, and the judge opened it with a deliberate slowness. Each page turned like the ticking of a clock, while Karen tried to backpedal, claiming it was all personal vendettas, and taken out of context, but her words cracked under the weight of the evidence, and I couldn't help but remember all the smaller stories that had led to this day. The retired teacher fined for planting sunflowers, the young couple threatened with foreclosure because their dog was too noisy, the widower who had been humiliated at a meeting for parking his truck in his own driveway. And I thought about how this cabin had always been my place of peace, the one refuge from HOA chaos, and how ironic it was that Karen's storm had followed me even here, only to collide with the immovable presence of federal authority. And then came the twist I hadn't seen coming, because Judge Reynolds asked her not about the HOA rules or the fake fines, but about a bank account registered in her maiden name, something only a deeper investigation could have uncovered. And Karen's face drained of color as he explained that complaints had been piling up in his office, serious enough to warrant federal review, and she stammered that it was her personal fund, but we all knew that money was HOA dues siphoned through shell accounts, and in that moment I felt a surge of both vindication and disbelief, because I had thought this was just a neighborhood battle, yet it was clear it had escalated into something bigger, bordering on criminal, and while she tried to spin another excuse, her phone buzzed on loud, betraying her with a string of desperate messages from other board members telling her not to say anything until the lawyer arrives, which only made her panic more, and the judge, calm as the steady lake outside, told her that silence might be her best option moving forward, and then, almost comically, she turned her anger on me, accusing me of setting her up, shouting about traitors and backstabbers, her voice rising so loud it startled a flock of geese from the water. But even then, I stayed silent, letting the judge's presence do the work, and he finally stood, a looming figure in the small cabin, telling her that she was free to leave, but not free from the consequences of what had been laid out. And as she stormed back through the door she had so rudely entered, muttering threats and half-baked insults, I felt the strange blend of triumph and exhaustion, because for years we had all endured her reign of intimidation, and now the balance of power had shifted in an instant. Yet the story didn't end there, because over the following weeks the ripples of that cabin confrontation spread like wildfire, with neighbors suddenly emboldened to speak out, reporters sniffing around, and Karen trying desperately to hold on to control of the HOA, even staging emergency meetings where she accused me of conspiring with the government to destroy community freedom. But the irony was rich because she had destroyed that freedom long ago with her obsessive grip on every detail of our lives. And eventually subpoenas arrived, financial audits began, and her allies on the board started resigning one by one to save their own skins, while Karen herself grew increasingly erratic, showing up outside my cabin more than once to shout through the trees about how she'd get me back, until one day she didn't come at all, because the law had finally caught up with her, and I learned through court notices that she was facing charges of fraud, embezzlement, and abuse of authority, and though the legal system moved slowly, it was moving, and the judge kept in touch, even stopping by the cabin once more to let me know that people like Karen often thrived only because no one had the courage to stand up, and that what I had done by compiling evidence and refusing to be bullied was the very definition of civic responsibility. And as I sat by the lake after he left, watching the sunset paint the water in gold, I thought about how a single person's arrogance had nearly torn apart an entire neighborhood, but also how one stormy intrusion into a quiet cabin had set into motion the unraveling of her empire. And maybe that was the strangest twist of all, that Karen's greatest mistake wasn't just her greed or her tyranny, but her inability to imagine that the people she thought she controlled could ever fight back. And though she had stormed into my cabin that morning with the full force of her bluster, she had walked out diminished, her power shattered by truth, and in the end, as neighbors rebuilt trust and laughter slowly returned to streets once ruled by fear, I knew the story of Karen wasn't just a cautionary tale about HOAs or petty dictators, but about the resilience of ordinary people who, when pushed too far, can band together and remind even the loudest storm that it cannot silence justice forever.